The courtroom was so quiet that every little sound seemed louder than usual. The scratch of a pen, the shuffle of papers, even the faint hum of the air conditioner felt heavy in the air. People sat shoulder to shoulder on the benches, some leaning forward, others whispering to the person next to them. But the moment their eyes shifted to the front of the room, all the small noises seemed to fade away. There, in the middle of it all, sat a woman in her military uniform. Her shoulders were straight, her chin slightly raised, but her wrists were bound together with silver handcuffs. She wasn't an ordinary soldier. She was a Navy SEAL sniper, known for her precision, discipline, and courage in the field. Many in that room had heard of her before today. Some had served alongside her. Others only knew her through the stories that traveled through military circles, the kind of stories that made you feel proud, even if you had never met her. But now, those same people were watching her, as if they didn't know what to believe. She didn't fidget, didn't look down, didn't avoid anyone's gaze. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, as though she was quietly studying every person who had come to see her trial. Some faces were sympathetic, offering small, silent encouragement. Others were cold, unreadable, perhaps even judgmental. The judge, an older man with years of service behind him, sat high above the room, his expression firm but not unkind. He gave a short nod to the clerk, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor stood, straightened his jacket, and began to speak in a clear, sharp voice. He outlined the charges, disobeying a direct order, compromising a mission, and acting without authorization. His words were formal, but underneath them was a hint of accusation that made the entire situation feel heavier. As he spoke, the woman didn't flinch. She had heard these words before. She had been preparing for this day for weeks, maybe months. But no amount of preparation could completely dull the sting of hearing them repeated in front of so many people. Somewhere in the back of the room, a young officer shifted uncomfortably. He remembered a time in training when she had helped him during a difficult exercise, refusing to leave him behind when others had already moved ahead. She had been that kind of teammate, the kind who didn't see you as a number or a rank, but as a person. The defense attorney sat next to her, occasionally leaning in to whisper a few quiet words. She nodded once or twice, but otherwise kept her gaze forward. She wasn't there to fight over every little detail. She wanted the truth to speak for itself, even if it took time. From the outside, someone might think she looked completely calm. But inside, her thoughts were moving quickly. She was replaying the events that had led her here, remembering every moment of the mission in question, the heat in the air, the voices in her earpiece, the split-second decisions. She knew what she had done, and she knew why she had done it. The question was whether the court would understand. The prosecutor continued, describing the mission as if it had been a textbook operation ruined by her decision. His tone suggested recklessness, a disregard for orders. And yet, for those who knew what it was like to be in the field, things were never that simple. In the gallery, a few people exchanged looks. They didn't know all the details, but they knew enough to question whether the story being told was the full truth. She glanced down at her hands for just a moment. The cold steel of the handcuffs pressed lightly against her skin, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her that she wasn't here as a celebrated soldier today. She was here as an accused one. The defense attorney finally stood, his voice softer but steady. He reminded the court of her record, years of service, countless successful missions, and the lives she had helped protect. He didn't paint her as perfect, but he made it clear that she was not reckless. She was measured, careful, and committed to her duty. A slight murmur ran through the room as people listened. It was the first time during the trial that the weight of her past achievements seemed to fill the space. Still, the judge remained focused. His eyes moved from the attorney to the woman, studying her expression as if trying to read her without words. In that moment, she felt the weight of the entire room pressing down on her. The uniforms, the medals, the flags on the walls, they were all reminders of the life she had chosen, a life that demanded sacrifice. But it was also a life that had taught her to stand tall, even when everything around her felt uncertain. As the first part of the hearing wrapped up for the day, the judge called for a short recess. The officers in the room stood at attention as the judge left. People began to talk again in hushed voices, but the focus never left her. Two military police officers stepped closer, ready to escort her out of the courtroom for the break. She rose to her feet, her posture unshaken. The clinking of the handcuffs echoed as she moved. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered, "She doesn't deserve this." She didn't turn to see who it was, but she heard it clearly. For a brief second, the corners of her mouth lifted into the faintest smile. The hallway outside the courtroom was cooler, quieter. She walked with the MPs down the long corridor, the sound of their boots tapping against the floor. In her mind, she knew this was just the beginning. There were more witnesses to be called, more arguments to be made, and perhaps surprises she couldn't yet see coming. But for now, all she could do was breathe, steady her mind, and be ready for whatever came next. Because in her heart, she knew one thing: the truth had a way of finding its voice, even in the most silent of rooms. When the break ended, the courtroom doors opened again, and people slowly returned to their seats. The soft chatter that had filled the room moments before began to fade. There was a certain tension in the air, the kind that made you feel something important was about to happen. The woman was led back inside, still in her uniform, still with the cold handcuffs around her wrists. Her steps were steady, and her eyes focused ahead. If she felt nervous, she didn't let it show. She sat down quietly at the defense table, her back straight as the military police stepped aside. The judge re-entered, and the room immediately stood in respect. Once everyone was seated again, the prosecutor rose to continue presenting the case. He began to speak, his tone even sharper now, as if he wanted to leave no doubt about her guilt. He described the mission in detail, using words that sounded official, almost clinical. According to him, it had been a carefully planned operation involving multiple units. Intelligence officers had spent weeks gathering information about a high-value target in an undisclosed location. The goal was not to eliminate the target immediately, but to watch, gather more intelligence, and then act at the right time. But the prosecutor claimed she had broken that plan. He said she had acted on her own, taking a shot that had not been authorized. He painted the picture of a soldier who thought she knew better than the command, someone who took unnecessary risks and disrupted a mission that was bigger than her. As he spoke, some people in the audience nodded, as if the logic made sense. But others looked uneasy. Her defense attorney sat quietly, taking notes, occasionally glancing at her. She remained still, listening to every word. The prosecutor then shifted his focus to her history. He didn't deny that she had an impressive record. He acknowledged her years of service, her awards, and the respect she had earned in the field. But then he suggested that sometimes experience could make a soldier overconfident, too willing to trust their own judgment instead of a chain of command. A few heads turned toward her again. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to show any reaction. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney stood and walked to the center of the room. His tone was calm, but his words carried a quiet strength. He reminded the court that missions in the field rarely went exactly as planned. Conditions could change in seconds, and soldiers were trained to adapt, to make decisions that could mean life or death. He spoke of her commitment to her team. He said that on that day, she had not acted out of pride or carelessness, but out of necessity. The circumstances, he promised, would become clear once they presented the full story. The judge listened carefully, occasionally making notes. The room was silent except for the voices of the two men arguing their cases. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the witnesses. The first was a young soldier who had been on the same mission. He walked to the stand, saluted the judge, and took his seat. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of what he had seen. He described the location, a hot, dusty village, the sun beating down, the tension that came with waiting for orders. He said that their unit had been in position for hours, watching the target, when something unexpected happened. From a rooftop nearby, armed men had started to gather. Their movements were fast and deliberate, not random. It was clear, he said, that they were preparing for something, possibly to attack the team. The defense attorney asked him what happened next. He said there was a moment when everyone froze, unsure of whether they were allowed to respond. That's when she took the shot. His voice grew quieter. If she hadn't, I'm not sure we'd all be here today. The prosecutor objected, saying this was speculation, but the words had already reached the audience. Some shifted in their seats, glancing at one another. The defense attorney asked no further questions, letting that single statement hang in the air. The next witness was an intelligence officer who had not been in the field, but had been monitoring the mission from the command center. His account was more measured. He confirmed that the original plan was to hold fire. However, he admitted that from their position, they couldn't see everything the team on the ground could see. The defense attorney pressed him gently. So you agree there's a possibility that what she saw justified her decision? The officer paused. It's possible, he said. That small admission seemed to shift the energy in the room, even if only slightly. Through it all, she sat quietly, her expression calm, but her mind was alive with memories. She could see the rooftop in her mind, the way the sun had glared off the weapon in one man's hand. She remembered the sound in her earpiece, voices talking over each other, some urging caution, others unsure what to do. She remembered the split second when she knew waiting would be the wrong choice. But she also knew the court didn't want her feelings, they wanted facts. As the day went on, more documents were presented, maps were shown, and timelines were reviewed. The trial was far from over, but a clearer picture was beginning to form. It wasn't the neat, black and white story the prosecution wanted it to be. When the judge finally called it for the day, the tension in the room eased slightly. People began to gather their things, but many lingered for a few moments, as if they weren't ready to leave just yet. The military police approached her again. She stood, the handcuffs catching the light, and followed them toward the door. Her attorney gave her a small nod, not of victory, but of encouragement. As she stepped into the hallway, she could hear the faint voices of people talking about the testimony they had just heard. Some doubted her, others defended her. But she didn't let any of it change the steady rhythm of her steps. She knew the truth, and she knew the truth had a way of waiting patiently until it was ready to be seen. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. There was still tension, but now it was mixed with curiosity. Yesterday had left people wondering if there was more to the story than the prosecution wanted to admit. She entered the room the same way she had the day before, handcuffed, uniform pressed, eyes forward. But there was something about her today. Maybe it was the way her steps were slightly more deliberate, or the calm steadiness in her breathing. Whatever it was, it gave the impression that she was ready for what was coming. The judge took his seat, and the session began. The defense attorney stood right away, asking to present a new witness. The request was granted. A man in his early 40s stepped forward. He was a quiet type, the kind whose presence didn't demand attention, but once you looked at him, you knew he had seen things. He took the oath and sat down. The defense attorney began with a simple question. Can you tell the court your role during the mission in question? The man nodded. I was the team's communications specialist. I had direct access to the real-time feeds and also to local intel reports coming in from secondary sources. What was your position in relation to the accused? I was positioned 2 buildings away from her. I could see her from where I was, but I also had a better angle on the street behind the target building. The attorney asked him to describe what he saw that day. The man leaned forward slightly. From my position, I noticed movement behind the target building. At first, I thought it was just locals passing through. But then I saw a group of armed men coming in fast from the rear. They weren't part of the mission. They weren't supposed to be there. He explained that he tried to get the information through the communication channels, but multiple conversations were happening at once. The command center was focused on the target, not the street behind. The seconds were slipping away. That's when she acted, he said, turning his gaze toward her. She saw them before I could get the warning through. If she hadn't taken that shot, those men would have been on top of us before anyone could react. The prosecutor stood quickly, trying to downplay his statement. Isn't it possible you're misremembering? This was months ago. The man's reply was firm. You don't forget the kind of day where you realize you might not go home. No, I'm not misremembering. The defense attorney let the words settle before thanking the witness. Next, they brought out mission logs, heavily redacted in parts, but still revealing enough to raise eyebrows. One entry noted unexpected armed movement in Sector 3, just moments before the disputed shot was fired. The prosecution tried to argue that the movement was unrelated, but the timing spoke for itself. Sitting there, she felt the faintest shift in the room. People were starting to piece together the possibility that her actions weren't reckless. They might have been exactly what saved lives. Her mind drifted for a moment, back to that day. She remembered the heat radiating off the rooftop where she was positioned, the weight of the rifle steady against her shoulder, the voices crackling in her earpiece. She had been scanning her sector when she caught sight of the movement. It wasn't casual, it was purposeful, and it set off alarms in her mind that training alone couldn't explain. She knew the rules. She knew the risk of acting without permission. But she also knew what hesitation could cost. The defense attorney then brought the conversation to her record in the field. He described her as someone who had always been measured, not impulsive. He told the court that she had never been written up for misconduct, never ignored orders without reason. Her entire career spoke of discipline, precision, and an ability to stay calm under pressure. The prosecutor tried to push back. Discipline is important, but so is following the chain of command. Without it, chaos takes over. The defense responded calmly. And sometimes, without the ability to act in the moment, you lose people you didn't have to lose. It wasn't an argument about who was right and who was wrong. It was about what it meant to be in a situation where both choices carried weight. By midday, the judge called for another recess. As she was escorted out, she could feel the eyes following her. Some were still skeptical, but others now looked at her with a quiet respect. In the hallway, her attorney caught up with her before she was taken to the holding area. "They're starting to listen," he said softly. "We're not there yet, but the cracks are showing." She nodded. "The truth doesn't rush," she replied. When court resumed, the final witness of the day was called, a logistics officer who had been responsible for coordinating extraction routes. His testimony was short but powerful. He confirmed that the unexpected armed movement had forced a change in their exit plan. "If the accused hadn't acted," he said, "our planned route would have been compromised." It's not an exaggeration to say lives were saved that day. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, there was a noticeable change in the air. The case wasn't over, but the story was no longer one-sided. She walked out of the courtroom that afternoon knowing there was still a long road ahead. The outcome wasn't certain, but now, for the first time since this all began, she could see the possibility that the truth might actually win. And that thought, that small, steady hope, was enough to keep her standing tall. The next morning began like the others, the shuffle of people finding their seats, the low hum of whispered conversations, the sharp smell of fresh coffee from paper cups carried in by early arrivals. But beneath the ordinary sounds, there was a quiet anticipation. Something in the air felt different. She entered the courtroom as she always did, in uniform, wrists in handcuffs, eyes forward. The sound of the cuffs brushing against her sleeves was barely audible, but for her, it was impossible to ignore. She sat down, her chair creaking softly in the stillness. The judge took his place, and the clerk called the room to order. The prosecutor rose first, holding a folder thick with documents. He began with a long, deliberate speech, repeating many of the same accusations as before, that she had disobeyed orders, jeopardized the mission, and undermined the chain of command. It was a speech meant to reinforce doubt in the minds of everyone listening. Her defense attorney waited patiently for his turn, but even from where she sat, she could tell he wasn't entirely focused on the prosecutor's words. Every so often, he glanced toward the large wooden doors at the back of the courtroom, as if expecting something. Then it happened. The heavy doors creaked open with a slow, deliberate sound that instantly pulled every eye in the room toward them. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. Even the prosecutor paused mid-sentence. A tall figure stepped into the doorway. The light from the hallway spilled across the polished shoes, the dark navy uniform, the gleaming brass buttons, and the row of service ribbons across his chest. The man's shoulders were broad, his posture impossibly straight, the kind of bearing that comes only from decades of command. It was an admiral. He didn't rush. He walked with calm, measured steps, each one landing with the weight of authority. People began to murmur under their breath, recognizing him. He was known in military circles, respected by those who had served under him, and even feared by some. His reputation was built not only on his years of service, but on the way he carried himself. A man who didn't waste words, but when he spoke, you listened. As he approached the front, he didn't look at anyone else. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not even the audience. His eyes were fixed on her. She didn't move, but a flicker of recognition passed over her face. The admiral stopped behind the defense table. He leaned slightly toward her attorney, speaking quietly. The attorney listened, nodded once, and then straightened to address the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to call an unexpected witness. The judge's brow furrowed. Who? The attorney stepped aside. Admiral, if you would. The murmurs in the room grew louder now. This was not an ordinary witness. The judge allowed it, though his expression showed both curiosity and caution. The admiral took the oath with the same calm confidence he had walked in with. When he sat, the chair seemed smaller beneath him. The defense attorney began, Admiral, could you tell the court your connection to the accused? I have served with her on multiple operations. I personally recommended her for the SEAL sniper program, and I was her commanding officer during one of the most critical deployments in recent years. There was a slight shift in the room, people leaning forward, wanting to hear more. Admiral, the attorney said, were you aware of the mission in question? I was, he replied, and I have reviewed all available mission logs, both classified and unclassified. And what is your assessment of her actions that day? The admiral looked directly at the judge. Her actions were correct. Not only correct, but essential. Without them, we would be talking about a very different outcome, one involving the loss of multiple American lives. The prosecutor quickly stood. Admiral, with all due respect, the mission's objective was not met as planned. How can you say her actions were correct? The admiral didn't flinch. Because, unlike a written plan, the battlefield doesn't freeze until you're ready. The enemy doesn't wait for your permission to move. She saw a threat developing that others, including the command center, could not see in time. Her decision prevented an ambush that would have compromised not only the mission, but the safety of our personnel. His words carried a weight that no chart or map could match. The defense attorney then asked, Admiral, why did you choose to come here today? The admiral paused for a moment. Because I've seen too many good people have their names dragged through the mud for doing the right thing. I will not stand by while it happens again. The courtroom was silent. Even those who had been skeptical before seemed to feel the force of what had just been said. From her seat, she felt a strange mix of relief and gratitude. It wasn't just that someone believed her. It was that someone of his standing had stepped into this space, into this fight, without hesitation. The judge leaned forward slightly. Admiral, are you prepared to provide documentation to support your claims? Yes, Your Honor, the admiral replied. I have brought with me mission reports, communications transcripts, and statements from other personnel involved. Some are classified, but I am willing to discuss them in closed session if necessary. The judge nodded slowly, clearly processing the shift in the trial's tone. The admiral's testimony continued for another half hour, each answer clear, direct, and impossible to twist into something else. By the time he stepped down, the room felt entirely different from when the day had begun. She sat quietly, the weight of the handcuffs still there, but for the first time, they didn't feel quite as heavy. Because now, she wasn't standing alone. The next day, the air in the courtroom felt sharper, as if everyone was more awake than usual. News of the admiral's surprise appearance had already spread through the building. People who hadn't even been following the case closely now found themselves leaning against the back wall, trying to catch a glimpse of what might happen next. She entered as she always did, still in uniform, still in handcuffs. But this time, the eyes watching her felt different. They weren't just sizing her up. Some were waiting for her to win. The judge called the court to order. The defense attorney rose almost immediately. Your Honor, with permission, the defense would like to present the evidence provided by yesterday's witness, Admiral. He paused briefly, letting the rank sink in again. Evidence which has direct bearing on the charges before this court. The judge gave a short nod. Proceed. The Admiral stood from his seat in the gallery and walked to the front with a thick folder under one arm. He placed it on the evidence table and opened it, revealing neatly organized documents, photographs, and printed transcripts. The defense attorney began with the mission logs. Projected on the screen behind him, the first page showed timestamps, call signs, and brief notations from the day of the operation. This, the Admiral explained, is the unclassified portion of the mission log. Notice the entry at 1,432 hours, unidentified movement, Sector 3. That's 15 seconds before the accused fired her weapon. This movement was not part of the planned scenario, nor was it anticipated in the intelligence briefings. He moved to the next page. Here, he continued, is the communication transcript from the same time frame. You can see multiple voices talking over each other, some reporting the target status, others mentioning possible movement. The accused voice is not heard here because she was making a decision in real time while these discussions were still happening. The prosecutor leaned forward. Admiral, these documents don't prove the movement was hostile. The Admiral's reply was steady. That's correct. But the accompanying field reports, which I'll get to next, confirm that the individuals were armed and positioned in such a way that they would have had a clear line of approach to our team within seconds. The defense attorney brought up a grainy black and white image, a still frame taken from a drone feed. It showed several figures moving quickly through a narrow street. Even with the low resolution, the outline of weapons could be seen. The Admiral tapped the image with a pointer. These men were not part of the operation. They were not local police. Their weapons were military grade, and their movement pattern was coordinated, not random. The accused saw them before anyone else could act. The room was quiet now, except for the faint hum of the projector. The Admiral turned to the judge. Your Honor, in my experience, you can train for years, follow procedures, and still face a moment where you must choose between the plan and the lives in front of you. She chose lives. And because of that, everyone on that mission came home. The defense attorney then introduced signed statements from 3 other members of the unit, one from the communications specialist, another from a logistics officer, and a third from a medic. All of them described how the shot had disrupted the armed group's approach and allowed the team to reposition safely. The prosecutor cross-examined, trying to suggest that the unit might have been able to defend themselves even without her intervention. But the medic statement, read aloud, countered that possibility. Had we waited for orders, we would have been in open crossfire with limited cover. We owe our safe return to her split-second decision. From her seat, she listened quietly, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't look at the screen, didn't glance at the audience. She kept her eyes on the judge, knowing that he was the one she needed to reach. As the documents and testimonies stacked up, the tone in the courtroom shifted. The accusations that had once sounded so solid now seemed less certain. The story was no longer one of disobedience, but of a soldier forced into an impossible choice, and making the one that saved lives. Finally, the Admiral presented the last piece of evidence, a letter handwritten and signed, from a senior intelligence officer whose identity was not disclosed in open court. The letter stated plainly that the accused actions prevented a catastrophic loss of personnel and safeguarded sensitive intelligence assets. When the letter was read aloud, the weight of those words filled the room. This wasn't just a defense, it was a validation from the kind of authority that couldn't be easily dismissed. The judge leaned back in his chair, taking a slow breath before speaking. We will recess until tomorrow to review the evidence presented. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp knock, but the tension in the air didn't break right away. People stayed in their seats a moment longer, whispering to one another. As she was escorted out, she caught a glimpse of the Admiral standing near the defense table. He gave her the smallest nod, a gesture that said more than words could. She returned it with the faintest smile, just enough to acknowledge that she understood. Tomorrow would be the day the court made its decision. And for the first time since the trial began, it felt like the truth had a real chance. The final day of the trial began with a different kind of silence. It wasn't the uneasy quiet of the first morning or the sharp tension of the Admiral's arrival. This was the kind of silence that comes when everyone knows something important is about to happen. She walked into the courtroom as she had every other day, but the stares felt different. There were no narrowed eyes or questioning glances this time, at least not as many. Some people even gave small nods, almost as if they were silently telling her, "Whatever happens, we believe you." The judge entered, his robe flowing slightly as he took a seat. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain gravity in his eyes. He wasted no time. "Before we proceed to the verdict, does either side wish to make final remarks?" The prosecutor stood first. His tone was calmer than it had been in previous days, but still firm. "Your Honor, this case has never been about questioning the accused's bravery or skill. It has been about the necessity of following orders for the greater success of missions. While we acknowledge the new evidence, we still maintain that the rules exist to prevent individual decisions from undermining broader objectives." He sat down, his words hanging in the air for just a moment before the defense attorney rose. "My client's decision was not made in defiance of the mission," the defense began. "It was made to preserve the mission and the lives of those carrying it out. The evidence we've seen, the testimonies we've heard, and the Admiral's account all point to the same truth. Without her action, this courtroom would be discussing the tragic loss of American personnel. She acted with courage, clarity, and a sense of duty that cannot be taught, only lived. And for that, she deserves honor, not punishment." The judge nodded once, then turned his attention directly to her. "Will the accused please stand?" The room went completely still. She rose to her feet, the chain between her handcuffs clinking softly. The judge began to speak slowly, his voice steady. "In reviewing the charges, the evidence, and the testimonies presented, it is clear to this court that while the accused did act without explicit authorization, her actions were in direct response to an imminent threat. The purpose of orders is to guide soldiers in achieving mission success, not to prevent them from adapting to realities on the ground that command cannot see." A pause. "This court finds the accused not guilty on all charges." The words seemed to ripple through the room. There was a collective exhale, as though everyone had been holding their breath for days. The military police stepped forward and unlocked the handcuffs. She rubbed her wrists unconsciously, feeling the absence of the cold metal. For the first time in weeks, her hands were free. The judge continued, "The court recognizes the accused's service record and her actions on the day in question as having directly preserved the lives of multiple personnel. These proceedings are now closed." The gavel struck once, but its sound was drowned out by the low hum of relieved whispers filling the room. She turned to her defense attorney, who offered a quiet, "It's over." And then she saw him, the Admiral, standing at the back of the courtroom. He didn't push forward, didn't make a scene. He simply stood there, arms at his sides, watching her with the same steady expression he had worn when he walked in days earlier. She stepped toward him through the slow-moving crowd. When she reached him, he gave a small nod. "You kept your team alive. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." She didn't say much in reply, only, "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "You earned this outcome yourself. I just made sure they saw what I already knew." Outside the courtroom, the bright daylight felt almost strange after so many hours under artificial lights. The air was fresher, the sounds of the city louder, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to just stand there and breathe. Reporters tried to approach, but her attorney shielded her politely, knowing this wasn't the moment for public statements. This was a moment for quiet, for processing what had just happened. In the distance, she saw a few members of her unit, the ones who had testified, waiting near the sidewalk. They didn't rush her. They simply stood there, hands in pockets, smiling faintly as she walked toward them. One of them, the communication specialist, gave her a small salute. She returned it, a silent gesture that said more than words could. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the streets began to empty, she sat alone for the first time since the verdict. Her uniform jacket hung neatly on a chair, the medals and patches catching the last bit of light. The trial was over, but the experience had left marks that weren't as visible as the ones the handcuffs had left on her wrists. She knew her career might never be exactly the same. She knew there would be people who still questioned her, people who would always see that one moment in the field as something to argue about. But she also knew this. When the time came to act, she had acted. And because of that, her team went home. And in the end, that was the only verdict that truly mattered to her.